What if soon Dynasty China never industrialized? Part 2. When we last left off, the East Asians had just discovered the Americas, and the Chinese and Japanese were fighting over control of the Oyashio current. To start this video, we'll turn away from the affairs of the East and look to the West as new forces would arrive in the region. By this point, the Europeans would have probably commenced the age of exploration, would have come into contact with the Chinese, likely in India. Unlike in this timeline, the advanced technology of the Chinese that would completely destroy European vessels would have resulted in the Europeans being driven out for some time. However, Europe would still have the correct social structure to adapt to Chinese military technology and would probably somehow figure out Chinese technology, in my opinion, probably to espionage. This would propel the Europeans into industrialization earlier. With knowledge of Chinese technology, the Europeans would have gained industrial technology, especially with the discovery of the New World, sparking a mass exodus outwards and thus creating demand for industrialization in the West. And the West and the Far East would become the dominant powers on Earth. Between the two, the Middle East and India did not have the social structures required for industrialization, and so would probably be partitioned by the West and East, respectively. In the Americas, we would still likely see the European colonized, as the East Asians would have been blocked by the Rockies and the tropics, thus preventing large-scale imperialization westward. The Americas would likely be divided between a European East and an East Asian West. A big shift is that Spain would have never colonized Mexico or Peru, meaning that they would never gain the vast wealth from the gold and silver mines from those regions, and become the dominant European powers in America. And instead, the English would have probably become the dominant force in the Americas, controlling most of the eastern and central United States and Canada. The lack of Mexican proving gold and silver would also mean that France would become the dominant force in Europe, being the most powerful, centralized, and militarized state on the continent. The lack of Mongol invasion would have several effects. The one that immediately came to mind was Russia. In our timeline, before the Mongol invasion, Russia, or rather the Kievan Rus, was doing pretty well for itself. It was a crucial part of the European trade. It was more advanced than much of the rest of Europe, and some states of the Kievan Rus even had parliaments. After the Mongols, Russia became an absolute state with no real economy, practically still stuck in the Middle Ages, while the rest of Europe entered the early modern period. In this timeline, that never occurs. Russia doesn't become disconnected from the rest of Europe after the fall of the Byzantines, and is on rough technological par with the rest of Europe. A big change would be that Russia would never push eastward into Siberia. The Chinese occupying most of Siberia, the Russians would not be able to barge in like they did in our timeline. Russia would also form much later without the existence of another group that weakened the power of the Mongol yoke that held Russia, the Timurids. For those of you who are unaware, Tamerlan, or Timur, was a late medieval Central Asian Chagatai warlord who forged a massive empire stretching from India to Anatolia. The main effects of his absence would be that the Ottomans received Constantinople half a century earlier without the Timurids. The Mughals, who were his descendants, would have never existed, and thus India would have been colonized earlier, and Russia would have formed much later. With the Ottomans seizing Constantinople earlier, they would have invaded Central Europe much earlier. Austria would likely fall into the Ottomans in this timeline. This, combined with Spain never being a great power, would mean that all of Germany would have fallen to Protestantism. This would have been aided by the Ottomans encouraging Protestantism, like they did in our time as revenge against the Catholic fanatics that were the Spanish. It's hard to say how India would have developed without the Mughals, but if I were to guess, India south of the Gangetic Plain would be heavily splintered, while Afghan tribes would invade the Gangetic Plain and forge an empire there. This occurs every few centuries in history, and so a repeat of this isn't unlikely. In our timeline, the sheer power of the Mughals prevented much of the European conquest. However, the Mughals not existing, there would have been forays deep into India by both the Europeans and Chinese. India would have been colonized much earlier. After a certain point, it becomes highly difficult to predict exact events, as so much of history has been altered that the chances of predicting things inaccurately swell. But there are few long-term predictions that I can still predict. The most obvious one is that technology would be much more advanced in this timeline. Within the start of 6 centuries, industrialization would currently speed up technological progress. Transportation would also be better due to industrialization, meaning that there would be a great exchange of ideas throughout the world. Additionally, the West and East both simultaneously industrializing, there would be more inventions, innovations, etc. A negative side effect of this timeline would be that the global warming would be far worse. The near millennium we had to start on massive emissions fueled by industrialization. I don't know how much it would affect this world, since we're just beginning to see the effects of global warming in our world, but expect higher sea levels in this timeline. So we've created vastly different worlds to ours. The truth is that I don't really know how this world would be like as of today. Would we be in an interstellar civilization, colonizing the outer reaches of the solar system? Would all the ice caps have melted and much of the world be underwater as a result? Would we somehow be exactly at where we are right now? The answer is, I don't know. I'm concluding this timeline around down at the 18th century. I could push it to the 20th century, or even today, but by that point, so much has changed that I cannot really predict anything with certainty, so I'll have to stop it here. Thank you for watching. Consider liking and sharing this video and subscribing if you haven't. If you didn't like this video, feel free to dislike. I do not care. As always, thank you for watching and have a fabulous day.